Welcome to another edition of Play It Through, and this time around it's Castlevania Adventure for the Game Boy, brought to us by Konami. Now this was Konami's first attempt at making a Castlevania game for a handheld system. And well, it does have a lot of problems. It seems like the game just, well, doesn't really feel like a Castlevania game. Even though yes, you are a vampire hunter, you have a whip, and you're fighting Dracula, there's just certain things missing. The biggest things missing, of course, are the extra weapons, being able to throw axes or crosses or even holy water. The other big thing is there's no stairs to climb up, you're climbing up ropes throughout it. And also the control is not very fluent, and as you can already see from just starting the game, you walk ridiculously slow. Now in this game you play as Christopher Belmont, not Simon Belmont from the original Castlevania on the NES. And this one actually takes place in timeline before the original Castlevania. Now I know there are multiple timelines, so I'm just going with the one that I think is the most true. So anyway, as far as I'm concerned, this one takes place before Castlevania 1. Now, the worst thing about this game is not even the controls with the sluggish movement. I can get over that. It's just the game really, well, it has it out for you. It's one of those games where you have to memorize and get the exact, precise timing when it comes to your jumps, especially in the third level of the game, which is easily one of the toughest Game Boy gameplay moments of the entire system's history. And the Game Boy lasted a pretty long time, yet somehow this game ranks up there with still some of the toughest games even after all the years of Game Boy titles. And of course we'll get more into that when we get to that aspect of the game in level 3. Even parts of some of the other levels are a real pain in the butt to deal with because the jumping is just so terrible. Now I'm going to try to avoid this eyeball, but I know I'm going to end up getting hit by it. Another big problem with the game is, of course, in the Castlevania game you upgrade your whip. The thing is, in this one you do upgrade it up 3 times, but the problem is every time you take damage, you lose 1 power-up. So when you max it out, you not only have a better whip, but you also shoot a little fireball out. So if you get hit once, you go back to just the big, the good whip. You get hit again, you're back down to your basic whip that of course takes many hits in order to do damage to enemies. Now of course you can upgrade it back up again, but there's not a whole lot of the whip upgrades spread out throughout the levels, so if you get hit a couple times, you're pretty much going to be stuck with the worst whip or just, the one that can't shoot the fireball. So even if you just have like the good whip, you'll be okay, but if you get downgraded to the worst whip, you're going to have some trouble, especially in some of the later levels dealing with certain enemies. Not that they get any tougher, really. They're pretty easy to deal with, but it's just taking a lot of extra time to do extra hits to them. Now here we have some falling blocks, which one, is a common thing in any platforming game, but in this one, you just have to, you have to master the controls, and you're not going to do it on your first attempt, and you're going to miss what you would think would be an easy jump in a normal game. And I mean, you play enough, you get good at it, but the first time you play this game, you're going to think you're about to make an easy jump, and you just end up missing, and I mean by a hair, barely even a centimeter, millimeter. You're not even going to be able to do anything. So here's the first boss, who's ridiculously easy. He walks at you, and you just hit him. He does a little spear move that he shoots out, but as long as you're within the distance and have the good whip, easily be able to take him out in just a few hits. He actually becomes a regular enemy in the final level of the game. Now the only other downfall, I guess you could say, is there's only 4 levels. But since these 4 levels are ridiculously tough, especially level 3, the thing is they didn't want you to make it far. So they're like, well, it's one of those games where, guess what? There's only a couple levels, so we're going to make sure that they're so hard that you're not going to really even notice that the game was only, officially a couple minutes long, comparing to a lot of the other games. But since this was Konami's first attempt, and the Game Boy was still very new at the time of the release of this game, there's only so much you can blame, on them for why this game isn't that great. And they did correct a lot of this, especially in the sequel, Belmont's Revenge, the second Castlevania game for the Game Boy. And then years later, one of my favorite games in the whole Castlevania franchise, Castlevania Legends, but that was the 3rd game on the Game Boy, and that didn't come out till years later, actually at the very end of the Game Boy run. Now watch out for this guy. I'm going to drop down and go down this rope here. And here we come down to this guy. This can be a little bit tricky, kill this guy, but what you gotta do is when you fall on this platform, it's gonna of course fall, but you gotta make sure you jump onto that platform right there, or else you'll just fall. If you try to walk to the right, it's not gonna work. You're just gonna fall straight to your death. And this game likes nothing more than do instant death through, many holes to you in this game. That's where you're gonna be most of the time, is dying in a hole. Watch out for these guys. I guess these guys are the equivalent of the double head dragons from other Castlevania titles. Even the enemies, they just don't feel like Castlevania enemies. Like I mentioned in my Castlevania 1 run, most of the enemies have remained a staple of the franchise. But in this one, they were all brand new enemies. Maybe they were going for something completely different when developing this game. Now it wasn't developed by another studio, it was still developed by Konami, but maybe it was just different people were working on it. I'm not positive about, the whole origins and who exactly worked on this title compared to the NES Castlevania game. So there may be a differential because this was a handheld, maybe they got a whole new team together to kind of create something new, and they just had some faults along the way and maybe just didn't get done what they wanted to, or just, one of those things where, hey, this is our first attempt, it didn't do so well, so let's build from that, which they, like I said before, they did build from it in Castlevania 2 for the Game Boy, Belmont's Revenge. As I continue on this very, very long series of bridges dealing with exploding eyeballs. An enemy that I'm quite glad does not really appear too much in the Castlevania franchise. And as far as I know, this is really the only time you deal with them. Now here's a little bit of a tricky area. You want to go to the right here instead of that left rope, because what happens is you end up just going through a couple extra screens, and then you end up looping back to that screen that we were with the choice of going left or right again. So just to save time, just head to the right one and then to the left ladder. Go through a few more rooms, and we're actually pretty much almost done this level. It's not too long of a level. The worst level, the longest level, probably is the third level, and it's not because of enemies, it's just because it's one of those scrolling style levels that you'll see soon. One of those classic scrolling levels that's a real pain, because you're being chased in this game by a bunch of spikes. Head to the right, got my weapon upgrade if I needed it, there we go. Head up here and down this ladder, or rope. And here we go with the boss battle. Now, this isn't really a boss per se, it's a series of many enemies, kind of like some of the Wily bosses in Mega Man, where it's like multiples of the same enemy with one health bar. There's also other games with the same type of boss. But you're dealing with mutant frogs, or I don't know, I guess they're mutant frogs. They could just be regular frogs that come out of these holes and come at me. This is just, another really easy boss. This is just as easy as the first one, except the first one takes less time, so I guess the first boss still gets the easiest boss award, which it should, being the first level, but this one's just a tedious battle. Not very fun, not exciting by any means, nothing cool to look at. Just 4 random holes that a frog will randomly jump out of. And you can see every 2 frogs or so, one little bar on the the boss health meter at the bottom right corner will slowly deplete. So we have about 3 more frogs left to go. We're down to 1, so we should have 2 more. Now 1 more, 1 last frog. There he is. He's done. And the level is now complete. Okay, racks up my score here as you get to see a timer at the top center of the screen, which gives me some bonus points. And now it's time for Stage 3. Oh, here's where the fun begins. This level is nothing but giant amounts of spikes. And of course, they're just like other Castlevania games. They're an instant kill if you land on them. Accidentally jump into them, walk into them, it doesn't matter. They're an instant kill, and you have to avoid them at all costs. And you start off with just this walking, you can continue, there's no scrolling yet. But as you're going through, you slowly see these ceilings start to fall down on you. Then you have to prepare yourself, get to the right areas, wait a second, and then continue your way over, and eventually you'll walk into a giant spiral screw thing that's slowly screwing the level closed. Don't know how practical that really is in a dungeon, but I guess it was there intentionally just to slowly crush people under the spikes. Too bad they are very, very weak against a whip of all things. This thing isn't very structurally sound here. There's another one done. And now head over to the right, we're actually done with that part, and we're actually going to be coming up to a series of ropes. After a little bit of platforming here, it's a little bit of a pain. Okay, here we go with the fun part, the hardest part probably in the entire game. Or at least this begins it. We have a long series of like a tower-like series of ropes as spikes slowly ascend from the bottom of the screen. We have to deal with not only platforming, but these random bugs that are kind of like crawling around like slugs on the surface of each of the random platforms, as well as jumping between ropes, and we also have these wonderful falling platforms. It's bad enough that you have to climb far enough up the rope in order to move over to the left or right in order to land on them, but if you go over too fast and you do land on the fallen platform, but the ceiling has not